We're going to go now to full screen browser, and in full screen mode here we've got, once again, the article Ayelet Shaked, applying sovereignty will prevent a Palestinian state. Let's see what we've got right here. Got a photograph, and the subtitle is Choice Between Yamina and Sovereignty, and Voting for Another Party and Getting a Palestinian State, MK Shaked says. We're going to go down a little bit further here and see what she's saying here. Former Justice Minister MK Ayelet Shaked of the Yamina on Friday morning said that applying Israeli sovereignty to Judea and Samaria will prevent the creation of a future Palestinian state. The choice is between Yamina and applying sovereignty and voting for any other party and a Palestinian terror state, Shaked said. In the deal of the century, if we begin by applying sovereignty, we won't reach the point of a Palestinian state. If we begin by negotiating a Palestinian state, we'll reach Oslo C with Eastern Jerusalem in the hands of terrorists and buses exploding, she warned. Shaked's warning echoes her Thursday statement that Israel must not delay applying sovereignty. Scrolling down a little further, this is an opportunity that comes once in 52 years, she said then. If we delay it now, who knows when there will be another opportunity. We will do everything we can to make sure the decision is brought for government approval next week. Also, on Thursday, a senior Israeli official and confidant of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu downplayed the apparent split between the U.S. and Israel regarding the timetable for the application of Israeli sovereignty over large swaths of Judea and Samaria. What has been agreed upon is a huge thing, recognition by an American president of the Israeli right to sovereignty in the Jordan Valley, northern Dead Sea, and the Jewish towns in Judea and Samaria, he said. Okay, so this is what Benjamin Netanyahu said. That's been achieved, and there's no argument about it, and it's going to happen. So this is a combination of what Ayelet Shaked is warning and cautioning, as well as what Benjamin Netanyahu said just a few days ago, actually, on the revealing of the deal of the century. Once again, this headline, I'll provide the link in the video description so that you can go directly to it. I believe that that's something that you'll want to check out for yourself, but you can find this over at Israel National News. I'm going to be, for the most part, just for the facility of using articles from the Israel National News website, we're just going to pretty much stay there in terms of the articles that we're going to look at, but I'm going to also, of course, go to what the scriptures have to say with respect to these developments. And the scriptures have a lot to say with respect to the land of Israel, obviously, in terms of end time, Bible prophecy, last days, or as even in the New Testament of the Bible, prophecies that we are, I believe, fast approaching. We have where the scriptures even reveal that, these are the last days, and it even goes so far as to say prophetically that this is the last hour. Now, from the standpoint of the time frames that we're talking about, I will refer to a Forbes magazine article for a little perspective. Recently on Forbes magazine, an article came out about the doomsday clock being set to 100 seconds prior to midnight. And it's noted that on the doomsday clock, the time has been changed as many, I think it was 23 times they've moved that minute hand, but where they have it positioned now is 100 seconds to midnight. Well, there is definitely a sense among many that we are living in some unprecedented times. If you study Bible prophecy, then you know that we are living in prophetic times. I'm going to go ahead and bring up another article from Israel National News, and this one actually is one which was published the day of the reveal. This was published prior to the actual announcement where President Trump actually revealed the deal along with Benjamin Netanyahu. Beside him, both men spoke. But what we're looking at right here is a very important headline. Once again, this was on the day of the reveal prior to the revealing of the Trump peace plan, or so-called deal of the century, a little bit after noon Eastern time on January 28th. This is something very interesting that happened, which I believe is most definitely worth noting. The Yesha Council chair, the headline reads, "Shocked that Prime Minister agreed to Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria." Our subtitle reads as follows: Yesha leaders now in Washington demands Prime Minister refuse deal entailing establishment of Palestinian state, even at the expense of sovereignty. Okay, that is how strong their warning, their caution, their admonition was. Now, we're going to take a little bit more of this in. That's an actual photograph of the Yesha Council members speaking with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah. But again, the headline is that the Yesha Council chair was shocked that the Prime Minister agreed to a Palestinian state in Judea and Judea and Samaria. Scrolling down, we'll take a look at the article. The Yesha Council delegation to Washington met with senior officials in the U.S. over the past day. Again, this is published on the 28th. Over the past day, and was exposed to the fact that the deal of the century to be unveiled this evening. By evening, of course, it's referring to evening Israeli time, because that would have been about 7 p.m. Because the announcement was made on, at noon Eastern time in the U.S. But getting back to this paragraph right here, the Yesha Council delegation to Washington met with senior officials in the U.S. over the past day and was exposed to the fact that the deal of the century to be unveiled this evening includes the establishment of a Palestinian state. Yesha Council Speaker David El-Hayani said, "We are very disturbed. We cannot agree to a plan that would include the establishment of a Palestinian state that would pose a threat to the state of Israel and a great danger to the future. We declare that we will not allow the establishment of a Palestinian state, even at the cost of giving up on sovereignty in Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley." So they're serious. They're very serious. "We demand that the Prime Minister, ministers, and Knesset members not allow a comprehensive agreement within which a Palestinian state is established in any way." In an interview with Canbet, El-Hayani said, "We came to Washington to bolster the Prime Minister and congratulate Trump, but after we processed things, we realized that the peace plan includes a Palestinian state. Now, I mentioned this some time ago in previous videos that, I mean, it's in the economic component of the deal of the century, which was released on June 22nd of 2019, it was obvious that this was about the formation of a Palestinian state. All of the language, without actually saying Palestinian state, without actually saying Palestinian statehood, without actually saying two-state solution, it was about the formation of a Palestinian state. That is what the economic component was about. And so, everybody was waiting for the reveal on the second portion of the deal of the century, the so-called deal of the century, being the political portion, of course. Yet, this is one of those things where they avoided saying Palestinian state or Palestinian statehood in the text of the economic portion, but it was obviously about the formation of a Palestinian state. So, just looking at chapter 3, for example, within the PDF document, the 40-page PDF document, which was the economic component, obviously chapter 3 was about the formation of a Palestinian state. And from the standpoint of what the scriptures have to reveal concerning the land of Israel and the will of God concerning the land of Israel, it really brings to mind some prophecies that we'll just for the moment say that are great cause for concern. Okay? Great cause for concern. We will get there, but for right now, let me just check here. It looks like I've still got a strong video signal. Hopefully the audio is good as well. And perhaps if you're watching this, whether live or on the replay, go ahead and announce yourself. I've shared this in a very limited fashion in terms of a few selected groups that hopefully this will be relevant to what your interests are with respect to the deal of the century and Bible prophecy. We're going to cover a lot of ground, but there's a reason why I'm beginning with these articles. Once again, this article right here is one which was published, posted to Israel National News on the morning, the evening in Israel, but in the morning in the U.S. Okay, but anyway, we're dealing with different time zones, but be that as it may, we'll continue with the article here. In an interview, read that part right there. Gush Etzion Regional Council Head Shlomo Neyman said after the meeting in Washington with Prime Minister Netanyahu alongside Yesha leaders, last night we completed our meeting with the Prime Minister with the Prime Minister Netanyahu and Minister Levin. I arrived here at the White House with fellow Yesha leaders Israel Gantz, Oded Ravivi, and David El Hayani, I hope I'm pronouncing some of these names correctly here, represent Judea and Samaria, so that during negotiations at his historic and exciting juncture, the Prime Minister would hear what our red lines are. Okay, and hey, I see you there, brother. Thanks for the thumbs up. We're just covering some articles here that this one in particular was from the day of the reveal. But we're going to lead up to something which I believe that as we consider these articles and headlines as a backdrop, when we actually get to some things that the scriptures have to say regarding the themes within these articles, it's going to be obvious where this is leading, and also the concerns with respect to what these things entail from a Bible prophecy standpoint. We are definitely living in the last days of the present age. All right, now, Naaman added, we will continue to develop Judea and Samaria and will not abandon any part of the land of Israel. Praise the Lord. Please, God, we will be witness to the application of sovereignty. Okay, so this is where these leaders of the Yesha Council stand. These are the Jews who came over with Netanyahu to Washington, D.C., and they wanted to be able to celebrate Netanyahu and Trump and congratulations and all this is wonderful. But when they saw that the plan clearly included the creation, the formation of a Palestinian state within the land of Israel, they drew brakes big time. And so that's what we're seeing in this article right here. Okay, so with respect to the sentence that we're reading in the present paragraph, they're praying, please, God, we will be witness to the application of sovereignty. Their appeal is to God right now. And something, and it continues, something which an historical achievement not only for the state of Israel, but on a grand scale for Jewish history as well. This moment is developing before our eyes. So you've got so much going on right here. Okay, now what we have here is the Yesha Council once again being shocked that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, agreed to a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. Okay. That is another article for which I will provide the link, but you can find this over at Israel National News. Of course, a lot of articles get posted and they kind of roll down, so some of these can be difficult to find later. I will provide you with the direct link, however, so that you can pull this up for yourself. Okay? Again, our topic and theme here in this video, this live stream, is the deal of the century and Bible prophecy. We're going to go into some additional articles in a moment, but I wanted to bring to your attention something that you'll see here on the screen, and that is a Bible verse from the book of Acts, chapter 13. And we're going to refer to both 1 Samuel chapter 13 and Acts chapter 13. So I just wanted to just throw that out for you to be thinking about what we're going to be covering in just a little bit. But what we're going to see in this is really profound, and it really brings clarity to where people need to come down in terms of this concept, this vision, which actually is calling for a Palestinian state in Judea, Samaria. The Word of God reveals the will of God very clearly, and especially concerning the land of Israel. Praise the Lord for that. Well, what we're going to do now is move on to a map. I want you to see a map. But before we go to the map, let's go to Acts. And we're going to Acts chapter 13. And we'll go to full screen here so that you can see it a little bit better. Okay, what we've got here is Acts chapter 13. And notice, and I'm going to make it so that you can see this full screen without me being in the way. What you've got right here is a reference to, in that very first verse, Antioch. I want you to hold that in your thoughts right there, okay? Antioch is, well, if you were to look at it in terms of the current countries and the modern day countries, you would basically be able to look up Antioch in modern day Syria. Now, this is important. We're going to go ahead and scroll down, and there is in verse 22b, meaning the second half of verse 22. I'm going to read something that I believe when you see this, we're going to appreciate this in a more significant way. What we have right here, and this is starting from verse 22, the beginning of verse 22. And when he, that is the Lord, had removed him, that is Saul, from being king, he raised up for them, that is the Israelites, David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. Now, this is significant. I'm going to come back here, join you with respect to this verse right here. The Lord says in this particular verse, which is a reference back to 1 Samuel chapter 13, that the Lord knew that David would do all of his will. Okay? David would do all of God's will. Now, what we're going to do in just a moment is we're going to quantify that. We're going to, look at that in terms of all of God's will with respect to what? Okay? All of God's will with respect to what? We're going to see that in just a moment. First, referring over to 1 Samuel 13, we're going to cross-reference this. And what we've got in this passage right here, if we scroll down, we'll see right here that Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now, the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Now, it's interesting, in this particular chapter right here, Saul performed a sacrifice, and Samuel was upset about that because, first of all, Saul was supposed to wait for Samuel to arrive, and he didn't. But there was also something else, which was a point of contention where the Lord told Saul to do certain things, and he did not do them fully. He did not completely do those things. Okay, we're going to just kind of float that out there. And this is why Samuel was upset with Saul. And he's telling him that, the Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart. And we're going to reach an aha moment in just a few moments, because when we think about what the Lord said about, or with respect to David, how is it that David actually was able to do all of God's will? What was that in reference to? And I'm telling you right now, it was definitely in reference to something so specific that when you realize how it was that the Lord commended David in this regard, it's just so profound. Let's go over to a map that is going to make this so clear. What you're looking at right here in this map is the upper region of a certain kingdom, okay? But this is not just the upper region of a certain kingdom. This was also the will of God being fulfilled with respect to the land of Israel. I'm going to scroll down on this map right here, and what you're going to see when I do that is a blue, not a circle, but more of a kind of a blue path or an outline of the land of Israel as the Lord sees the land of Israel. This is so important. And there's a reference to the website. I'm going to give you the source right now. You can find this at bible.ca/maps. Okay. And when you go to bible.ca/maps, you're going to be able to download free maps, but I picked this one out for you to see. I'll provide the link. I picked this one out for you to see it because when you see this map, and of course you're seeing it right now, but I want you to be able to see this for yourself and to really appreciate what happened here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm still with you, but I'm just going to go to the full screen without the video inset. Okay. I see your comment there too, Chris. Yes, definitely. David was a flawed man, but this is so amazing because what we see right here is the kingdom of David. David fulfills land promise to Abraham. The Lord made this land promise, this covenant, this everlasting covenant with Abram before he changed his name to Abraham. But we're talking about the same person, obviously. But when the Lord made this everlasting covenant, as it is described in Psalm 105, verses 7 through 11, as an everlasting covenant, when the Lord made this covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15, verse 18, he made a promise to Abraham, which, when you think about the animals that were sacrificed, that was a very solemn promise. Abraham was actually asleep when the Lord performed this covenant. You know, of course, Abraham was fighting off the birds that were trying to come after the animals that had been sacrificed. But with respect to the terms of the covenant and the promise to fulfill the terms of the covenant, that was all on the Lord. He made it so that it was something that he was solely responsible for bringing to pass. Now, it was a covenant between the Lord and Abraham, of course, okay? But what is so important about this is the Lord sees this covenant, once again, referring to Psalm 105, the Lord sees this covenant as an everlasting covenant. And the Bible says that he remembers this forever. That is so awesome, okay? Because even though the covenant land or the promised land has been, let's just put it this way, it has been in many respects, the terms of the covenant, we'll just say, have been challenged repeatedly, okay? Nevertheless, the Lord remembers this covenant forever. It is an everlasting covenant. And what is so significant about this map is that we see in this map that what the Lord said concerning David, what the Lord knew about David, and what he said in advance was that David would do all of God's will. once again, I want to quantify this, and I want to put it in terms of what the Lord was referring to. What he was referring to is what you are looking at right now. What David did is he did all of God's will in terms of extending the borders of Israel to the borders that the Lord promised to Abraham when he cut covenant with Abraham regarding the promised land, the everlasting covenant. This is so awesome. Now, when you look at the city names like Antioch, you see it right here. I'm going to move my mouse over there so you can see it. Well, here's my magnifying glass, okay? You've got Antioch. You've got Aleppo. I mean, how often have we heard about Aleppo in current event headlines? You know, Aleppo, Syria, right? Northern Syria. Well, do you realize that what you see inside of the blue outline is what God considers to be the promised land? Okay? I hope you're sitting down for this because, you know, it might not be politically correct, but this is how God sees the promised land. All right? Just scrolling down a little further, and I'll slide it over here. What you have in this map is you've got the river of Egypt, okay? We know what the river of Egypt is. The river of Egypt is the Nile, okay? So the Lord said that the promised land would be everything from the river of Egypt all the way up to the Euphrates. And when I slide this over here, you'll see the Euphrates right here, okay? You got the Euphrates, and you've got, of course, the Mediterranean Sea. And in Joshua chapter 1, what the Lord did is he reiterated this, you know, the borders of the land in which Joshua was supposed to go in and take with the children of Israel. The Lord reaffirmed the borders, and of course he said in Joshua chapter 1, he specifically named the children of Israel. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 15, the Lord promised it to Abram and his seed. Israel had not yet been born, but certainly by Joshua chapter 1, Israel had not only been born, but he had 12 sons, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel, the children of Israel. And so what we have now is we've got the land promise fulfilled by David. What is so important about this, and I'll come back and join you in the video overlay. What is so important about this is that this is the promised land as God sees the promised land. Okay? Now, it might not be what Israel presently controls, but this is the promised land as far as the Bible is concerned. Now, Israel is not presently controlling all of this, obviously. You got Syria up here, okay? You got Syria up here, and then you've got Lebanon in here. But you know, when you read Joshua chapter 1, it actually refers to all of this area as the land that Joshua and the children of Israel were supposed to take, because this was the promised land. Okay? And you know what? It still is the promised land. Some things are going to be happening where we may see some boundaries go back to what the Lord intended and what he promised. But once again, as we scroll down here, look at this. This is Damascus. You know where that is. Okay, Damascus, Syria. Okay, but all of this is what David made the kingdom that the Lord wanted Israel to have. Okay? Now, I'm going to, let's see if I can pull this up. I hope I can pull this. There we go. All right. What I'm going to do is point out, so you can see it in a different way. You've got the Nile River here. All right. You've got the Euphrates River over here. Okay. Now, sometimes people will look at this map and then, let's see if I can just kind of nudge it over a little bit. And they'll say, okay, well, because the Nile comes all the way down here and the Euphrates comes all the way over here, they'll just kind of draw a line across and say that this is all the promised land. Okay. That all of this is the promised land, all the way down to, Kuwait. I guess technically, I mean, that's all between the Nile and the Euphrates. Okay, as you can see, the Euphrates River comes all the way down here. However, once again, with respect to what the Lord said concerning David doing all of his will, the land that the kingdom of David included, okay, was all the way down to the river of Egypt, yes, okay, the Nile, up to the Euphrates over here. David basically possessed all of this land. And once again, what the Bible says concerning David, what the Lord said in his word concerning David, is that he was a man after God's own heart. Because why? Because he would do all of God's will. I submit to you that even though David was a flawed man, I mean, he wasn't perfect, but even though David was a flawed man, as each of us are, what we see right here is that he fulfilled the land promise to Abram. Okay? And that's why I believe the scriptures say that he was a man after God's own heart. Okay? I believe that that is what the Lord was referring to when he said that he knew that David would do all of his will. Okay, now, having said that, if we know that this land, which comprise the kingdom of David, if we knew, and if we know that this land right here represents the promised land, and more importantly, the will of God concerning the land of Israel. I'm going to go somewhere with this. If we knew, and if we know that this is the will of God concerning the land of Israel, at that time, is it not the will of God concerning the land of Israel now? Now, it might not be the present reality, but nevertheless, if that was God's will concerning the land of Israel then why would he change his mind? I submit to you that he hasn't. I believe that just as sure as Psalm 105 says that the Lord remembers this covenant forever and describes this promised land, this land covenant, as an everlasting covenant, I submit to you that it's still God's will. Now, all of this, as we see it in this map, is the will of God concerning the land of Israel. And once again, I believe that one of the reasons why this was so important to the Lord is that the Lord made a promise to Abraham, and he knew that David would do all of his will. All right. Now, what we're going to do, having said all of that, is take a look at another map. All right. What this is the Vision for Peace conceptual map, a future state of Palestine. Oh my goodness. Now, if what we saw just moments ago was the will of God concerning the land of Israel, then this green area that you see, which, well, which is being allocated, at least in this deal of the century plan, this land that's being allocated for a Palestinian state, is at odds with the revealed will of God concerning the land of Israel. That is why I showed you the articles that I opened up this video with, because the Yesha Council, the concerns that they've expressed concerning this future state of Palestine are valid concerns. Because what's happening in this, and that which has been agreed to at least in principle, and that which was so shocking to the Yesha Council, is that Prime Minister Netanyahu would actually agree to such a thing as having a Palestinian state within the land of Israel, within Israel's heartland. That was something that they were not expecting. They would probably never have expected him to agree with that, because Netanyahu's campaign promises in that second round of elections, the Israeli elections, I believe the promises that really made the difference for him to win, even though he was not able to form a coalition government, I believe that the reason why he won is he promised that there would be no two-state solution, and he promised that he would annex the West Bank, and he made some promises that I believe that the people of Israel resonated with, and so he won the re-election. However, you'll recall that in certain articles that came out right about that same time, Jared Kushner had expressed that he had hoped that Netanyahu would not move too quickly on some of those things that he said. Okay, and obviously we can see why now, because the second portion of the deal of the century, this vision of a Palestinian state, includes this land right here being formally recognized as a Palestinian state. Not only that, the capital of the Palestinian state would be in parts of East Jerusalem. I believe that a lot of people were put to bed and they went right to sleep when they heard the word undivided. Oh, as soon as they heard the word undivided, critical thinking skills just went out the window and everybody relaxed. The defenses were down. That was such a disarming word to say, undivided. But this looks divided to me. When you talk about a Palestinian state capital in East Jerusalem, that sounds divided to me. That doesn't sound undivided. That sounds divided. And when I see this vision of the land here being potentially eventually recognized as a Palestinian state, that looks pretty divided, okay? That is why we began this live stream video with some of the articles that we considered. Now, what I'm going to do as I'm looking at this Vision for Peace conceptual map with you is I'm going to slide this over and we're going to take a look right next to it. You've got the state of Israel as it is envisioned in the Vision for Peace conceptual map. Okay, I'm going to go to an article after showing this to you, which I believe is completely relevant. Well, I know it's completely relevant because it talks about some of the things that are illustrated here. If you look closely, you'll see the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 inside of the green or aqua colored areas that are designated for the formation of a Palestinian state. These numbers inside these circles right here are none other than Israeli enclave communities. Okay, and there's the list of the names right there. You can see them all right there. These are real communities that have Jewish populations, and although it was stated that they would not have to be expelled, the Jewish people who were living in these communities would not be expelled, it's going to be, well, I'm going to let an article say it for us. We're going to go over to an article that is related to this. If I can find it, I think I've got it. Open. Okay, yeah, we've got it right here. What we have right here on Breaking Israel News, I'll provide the link, is an article entitled 15 biblical towns to be 15 biblical towns to be placed under siege if Trump's peace plan succeeds. Okay, this article is by David Sidman, and it was published at 10:56 p.m. just almost 4 hours after the deal of the century was revealed. Okay, now scrolling down, what we have here in the article, as Trump's peace plan was unveiled on Tuesday, many elements of the document were cause for concern for the pro-Israel community. Among them, myself included, if you're pro-Israel, among them was a 4-year building freeze for Jews only in Judea and Samaria, and a future Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem. Now, I know there are a number of people who are looking for the good in this, and they're applauding the deal of the century, the so-called deal of the century, and a lot of people are so excited about it. But from the standpoint of just what we read in this opening paragraph, the formation of a Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem, from a biblical standpoint, from the standpoint of what you have seen in terms of the will of God concerning the land of Israel, that is why you have a number of Jews and conservative Christians recognizing that it's a non-starter. But I'll go on to the next paragraph. But a lesser noticed result of the deal of the century involves 15 Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria, all with biblical roots, who will be completely surrounded by terrorists in the future Palestinian state that Trump would like to create should his plan come to fruition, according to Con News. So scrolling down, we've got a tweet that went out, and it's text is in Arabic, obviously appealing to the Palestinians, and it's also all the details of the map, as you can see, are written in Arabic. Okay, that is the Palestinian state right there. And then scrolling down a little bit further, you have it in English, a future state of Palestine. And then further down the article, what we have is a list of the towns that would be affected, because these are Jewish communities that would be surrounded by an element that, being formally recognized, would pose a problem, would pose potentially many problems. And that's why, once again, we started off with the articles that we did at the beginning of the video. But scrolling down a little further, we have the names of other towns right here. I won't read all of the details, but this is the forest, right? Okay, and you've got the trees in there. We're not going to get into the details, but I'll provide the link to the articles. But what we have is Jewish communities that would definitely be affected, and it is definitely cause for concern. Once again, this article being at Breaking Israel News. What I'm going to do is bring up something which I believe, in certain respects, is very relevant. And what we have right here is, you've got at the Jewish Virtual Library, you've got Ariel Sharon's biography. And one thing that, I want to mention right up front is Ariel Sharon has a recognized history of heroic service to Israel, not the least of which is 25 years of service in the IDF and various other details here. And yet, what happened was, in 2005, you basically had what was called the Gaza expulsion. And it was really tragic. It was really tragic. Without getting into that too much, suffice it to say that shortly after the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, agreed to having Jewish settlers removed from their homes, he actually suffered a stroke and was in a coma for years. Some might say it was just a coincidence, but the Bible even says that Gaza would be forsaken. Bible prophecy actually refers to Gaza being forsaken. And it's interesting, sometimes these prophecies, when we read them, prior to 2005, when you read certain prophecies, you wonder, okay, well, what's that about? But then you look back after something happens, and you realize, oh, wow, that is what it was talking about. Okay, well, that being said, after Ariel Sharon agreed to what would come to be recognized as the Gaza expulsion, He suffered a stroke, went into a coma for years until he eventually passed away. Is that just a coincidence? I don't know. I don't know. Because if you go back a little further in time, there was another Israeli prime minister who met with an untimely demise, and with respect to Yitzhak Rabin, it was right on the heels of certain decisions being made concerning the land of Israel. And I want to be extremely sensitive when I talk about these things, because I'm concerned about the pattern. Because if the pattern is one that repeats, it is not in the best interest of a prime minister of Israel to give up any part of the land that the Lord promised to Abraham and the children of Israel. It is a very serious matter, because as we see in Joel chapter 3, verse 2, one of the reasons why the Lord is going to judge the nations, he says right there, is that they divided his land. They parted his land. In one version of the Bible, it says, and they even divided my land. So it's a very serious matter. Once again, that covenant, that land covenant, was fulfilled by David, and David was commended for that as one whom the Lord knew would do all of his will. Can we take a look at that map again? I think I still have it over here. Isn't that amazing? This right here, visually presented, is the will of God. The Bible is the Word of God. It contains the will of God. And visually represented here, we have the will of God concerning the land of Israel. If this was God's will concerning the land of Israel, when the Lord made that covenant promise to Abraham, do you suppose it may still be the will of God now? And so for any leader to pressure Israel to go backwards in terms of the land that they control, land that the Lord promised to them, it's a very serious matter, at least from what we can tell in observing the patterns from the recent past. I mean, we're not talking about thousands of years ago only. We're talking about 2005. We're talking about, 1995? So basically what we're looking at here, once again, is the will of God concerning the land of Israel. And David fulfilled that land promise to Abraham. David did all of God's will. He said, the Lord said, that David would do all of his will. What you're looking at right here is David doing all of God's will regarding something that will always be important to the Lord, and that is the everlasting covenant. Psalm 105 says that he remembers his covenant forever. It's an everlasting covenant. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Well, okay, so we looked at what the virtual library, the Jewish virtual library, has to say regarding Ariel Sharon. Once again, a great leader of Israel. Great leader of Israel. All of his accomplishments, achievements recognized. But once again, and it has it right here, you've got this plan, his plan to disengage from the Gaza Strip. Oh my goodness. Can I spend a little more time here? And hey, thank you for subscribing, brother. I saw that. Can I spend a little more time on this one right here? We'll scroll down. Actually, I think it's a little bit higher up here. Okay, so here we go. Let's read from right here. Once again, the Jewish virtual library. His plan, that is Ariel Sharon's plan to disengage from the Gaza Strip, called for the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops and settlers, as well as the dismantlement of all settlements in the area. He also decided to withdraw from 4 settlements in northern Samaria. The idea was considered shocking. Isn't it interesting how these themes and headlines are kind of repeating themselves? We read an article just earlier in this video about how the Yesha Council chair was shocked that Prime Minister Netanyahu had agreed to the Trump peace deal, the deal of the century, because it actually is a vision of creating a Palestinian state within the land of Israel. Okay, so what we have here, is a pattern. Can I call it a pattern? He also decided to withdraw from 4 settlements in northern Samaria. The idea was considered shocking because Sharon had been considered one of the fathers of the settlement movement. When I think about Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's been so strong on at least the promises that he's made. He's been so strong on annexing this and annexing that, and there's not going to be, there will be no Palestinian state, there will be no 2-state solution. He's been so strong on that people were shocked. The Yesha Council chair and various others, as we read in the article earlier, were shocked that he would agree to the potential formation of a Palestinian state in the land of Israel with its capital, the Palestinian State Capital in East Jerusalem. They were shocked. And that was the case with Ariel Sharon. The idea was considered shocking because Sharon had been considered one of the fathers of the settlement movement. Several reasons have been offered for his decision, and it goes on, but still the point is, you had Jewish people removed from their homes in the land which the Lord promised to them. In Amos chapter 9, verses 14 and 15, the Lord said that he would bring back the captivity of Judah. He said that he would bring them back and firmly plant them into their own land. And I believe that we are living, obviously, in the days in which the Lord has brought the Jewish people back to their land and firmly planted them in their land, obviously. And he said that when he did that, they will never be uprooted again. Now, there's a point in which, there's been a little bit of 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, in modern history concerning the land of Israel. But there's a point in which that prophecy in Amos chapter 9, verses 14 and 15, last couple verses in that book, there's a point in which the Lord is going to say, no more. They will never be uprooted again. I believe we're living at the time in which they're not supposed to be uprooted anymore. Okay? And there are severe consequences. There will be even more severe consequences in the days ahead for any nation that forces them or attempts to force them to be uprooted. Okay. Now I know that the deal of the century, in at least the presentation that President Trump made with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right next to him, I know that what was stated is that no Jewish communities are going to be uprooted. Okay. Well, okay. However, when you think about the formation of a Palestinian state, this vision of a Palestinian state, a 2-state solution, with a Palestinian State Capital in East Jerusalem, that would change the dynamics such that those 15 Jewish enclaves, if we go back over to that map, those 15 right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. These communities listed right down here, and the map says the list is not all-inclusive because there are more. But when we look at these communities right here, I mean, what is life going to be like in these communities if this is allowed to happen? I mean, we can tell we can tell ourselves that the Palestinians, which, let's be honest, we're really talking about Arabs. Okay? If we tell ourselves that, okay, from now on, they're going to not threaten the Jewish communities, and over here in Gaza, Hamas is going to be disarmed. They're not going to launch any more rockets into Israel. I mean, we can tell ourselves these things, but from the standpoint of their ideology, which, if you want to read the Cliff Notes, as it were, for what Hamas believes, just read the Hamas Charter. You can find it on the Yale University website, and it has it right there. It's spelled out. They are prohibited from negotiating with Jews, Christians, anyone who is not Muslim. They are prohibited from negotiating. Okay? We're talking about the Hamas Charter. And not only are they prohibited from negotiating, which is why they've said no, 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 no every time, they're basically following what the charter says. Well, with that being said, there's no way that they're going to just change that pattern now. Not willingly. And I think it's la la land to believe that they would be willing to do so. Because also in that Hamas charter, it states what their objectives are concerning Israel, concerning the Jewish people. It's all right there in the Hamas charter. Okay, I am not going to read it or quote it in detail in this video. I'm just telling you where you can go to find it. It's online, and you can see for yourself that this vision for peace, at some point meets up with the hard reality of what their charter entails. They're not going to disarm. They're not going to, at least not willingly. Okay? So what would end up happening is that Israel would do all the giving, and, you know, the fact that Israel under this plan would have to stop any further developments in their settlements. I don't even like calling them settlements because, you know, when you talk about settlements, it's not a settlement when you are building on your own land. It's called housing development. Okay? If you are building on your own land, it is not settlement. I mean, if you go to Home Depot and you get materials to do some improvements on your home or on your land, it's not settlement. It's called home improvement. Okay? So this right here, this vision, reminds me of something else that I have read in the book of Isaiah. I won't get too specific on that right now. We'll just wait and see. But this vision for peace, if we were to ask ourselves the question now, is the deal of the century against the will of God? We have but to look at the will of God, visually presented, and decide for ourselves whether we are going to believe our own eyes or not. Because now you can see, and I've spent a fair amount of time reiterating this point, when the Lord said that David was a man after his own heart because he would do all of God's will, I can only tell you that what the Lord was referring to is this right here, because this is what David did. David took the promised land, and he fulfilled the Lord's promise to Abraham. And given the importance of this promise to the Lord, given how important it still is to the Lord, because the Word of God says that He remembers it forever. Not even that He will remember it forever, but simply that He remembers it forever. Nuances when the land of Israel is threatened. I'm just just saying, okay? Now, what we're going to do is take a look at something else here. See if I can bring this in. Okay, what you have right here, and I don't know, because I wasn't there. I can only read about it. But what we have right here is an article. Let me go ahead and move my video out of the way here. What we have right here is an article about a 7.7 earthquake in the Caribbean. I mean, near the Cayman Islands, near Jamaica, below Cuba. A 7.7 earthquake, which was so powerful that it even shook buildings in Miami. It even shook buildings in Miami. All right, I'm getting a little update here. Did I lose signal right there, Chris? Okay, am I back now? Okay, awesome. This right here, I mean, I heard from someone in Miami that they didn't feel it, so I don't know. But what I've read is that even Mar-a-Lago was shaken. Key West was shaken. This 7.7 in the Caribbean, this 7.7 magnitude earthquake was that powerful. I have read that it took place 77 minutes after the revealing of the deal of the century. I have read that it touched 7 different countries. Okay, so you've got a 7.7 magnitude earthquake, which is the largest earthquake that the Caribbean, so far as what I've read is concerned, the largest, strongest, most powerful earthquake that the Caribbean has experienced in its history, as far as these things being recorded. 7.7 magnitude, 77 minutes after the deal of the century was revealed, affected 7 countries. Okay, so that's what I've read. This right here is consistent with what I believe has been pointed out repeatedly. And I want to bring up a book and show you right here, so if I can. Okay, I've got a book. Let me hold it over here. Entitled Eye to Eye. And this, it's funny how on camera you got to do everything kind of backwards so that, there you go. This book, can I angle it right? Anyway, can you guys see that? This book, Eye to Eye, was written by William Koenig. I've read a fair amount of it. I haven't read all of it. Just look at this thing. This is like a college textbook. But what this does is it actually takes the times when the United States has pressured Israel to give up any part of its land, or even mentioned it. Maybe it wasn't a formal ceremony, but just the headlines, just the discussions were taking place, whether formally or informally. There have been natural disasters, we'll just kind of air quote that, natural disasters that have struck the United States or United States interests within a 24 to 48 hour time frame. There are some books about that. I know that I've actually written a book that references a lot of these things too, but I'm not talking about my book right now. I wanted to talk about this one right here. Okay, this book right here, Eye to Eye, the consequences, facing the consequences of dividing the land of Israel, is written by William Koenig, who is a White House press correspondent for some 18 plus years, coming up on maybe it's 20 years by now. I don't know. But eye to eye, okay? The documentation is there. All right? The deal of the century proposes the formation of a Palestinian state in the Jewish heartland of the land of Israel. It proposes the capital of a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem. We've looked at the maps. Future Palestinian state. And once again, title of this conceptual map is Vision for Peace. Ooh. The prophet Isaiah talked about a grievous vision. And when I saw this, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are applauding it. I'm like, what part of Palestinian statehood in the land of Israel did you miss? What part of a Palestinian state capital in East Jerusalem did you miss? But just a lot of people are just clapping it up. And I was shocked. I was shocked that Prime Minister Netanyahu ate it up like candy. I just, best way I can describe it. And a friend with whom I had shared that, because, you know, a lot of people didn't see the live stream. When I was watching the live stream, I think the White House live stream had about 7,000 people watching it at the time that, you know, it was between 7,000, it would kind of fluctuate. 7,000 to 8,000 people were watching the White House live stream. Now, Fox News was live streaming it, and there were a couple of other news outlets that were live streaming it. But for the most part, I think most people were probably watching the White House live stream, and it was about 7,000, 7,500 to 8,000 people watching it at any given time of that announcement. So a lot of people didn't actually see it, okay? But when I shared this with one of my friends online, I told him I saw it, I heard it, I just can't believe it, because Prime Minister Netanyahu was on board with it, you know? But as we began in this video, we have here a race toward applying sovereignty immediately by Israel's right. Ayelet Shaked said applying sovereignty will prevent a Palestinian state. She wants to move on that right away. Okay. We also, just by way of review, we also looked at this article in which the Yesha Council chair was shocked that the Prime Minister agreed to Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. Okay. Yesha leaders now in Washington. Well, this was on Tuesday. Then in Washington, demanded that the Prime Minister refuse the deal entailing the establishment of a Palestinian state, even at the expense of sovereignty. We saw how the list of 15 enclaves of Jewish communities in what would become a formally recognized Palestinian state would be at risk. These communities would be at risk. Now, I'm not making this up. I'm reading from Breaking Israel News. Okay, I can move out of the way so that you can see the masthead. We're just referencing Jewish news sites, and we're seeing what they have to say about this, and this is what they have to say. The question that comes up right here in this article, I'll provide the link inside of the video notes, the video description. Will Israel abandon its most brave Jews under the peace plan? Only passionately convinced people would visit these Jewish towns. As I have said, well, let me read this correctly. I kind of messed up right there. This is an op-ed, okay? This is an editorial, all right? And what they're saying here is only passionately convinced people would visit these Jewish towns, as I have many times. That's what he's saying. And I warn Israel, don't freeze and abandon these communities. Don't freeze and abandon these communities. This article, I kind of held it back for now so that we could take a look at the conceptual maps and now compare it to this editorial. The author of this, he's raising a valid concern. I'm going to provide the link to this. I'm not going to read it through, but the points that are raised in this article, I wanted to reserve that for now so that you can kind of see what this is saying in light of the conceptual map. We have another article with Ayelet Shaked. Application of sovereignty must not be delayed. This is an opportunity that comes once in 52 years. If we delay it now, who knows when there will be another opportunity. Now, the opportunity that she's talking about is not the opportunity of the deal of the century. The opportunity that she's talking about is the opportunity to establish Israeli sovereignty over Israeli land, okay, in a hurry, because they may lose that opportunity. So we're talking about two different opportunities here, okay? And this one, I would have to say, this perspective is more consistent with God's vision for the land of Israel with respect to his promise to Abraham, a covenant that he remembers forever. And that's why it's called the everlasting covenant. It is a land covenant. Okay, where are we? I got more that I could share with you concerning these things, but I think what I'll do is just round out this video going back to the map that conveys the will of God concerning the land of Israel. Okay? Some will see this and say, no way, that's Syria, that's Lebanon, that's okay. I'm just saying, right? This is a map of what David accomplished. These are the details of how he went about doing that as recorded in the Bible. And this is why the Lord said of David that he is a man after his own heart. Because why? Because he would do all of God's will. All of God's will with respect to what? I submit to you that it is God's will concerning the land of Israel, and the reason why the Lord was so excited about what David would do is that it would fulfill God's promise to Abraham, The question that I posed earlier is that if it was God's will then, do you suppose it might still be God's will now?